Hey guys, Kyle with Dirt Bike Channel here again. I'm about to ask a controversial question. Do you really need that 454 stroke for the type of riding you're doing?
No.
My guess is the honest answer to that question is no. Probably not. Now I know it's painful for some of us manly men to really think about how we might not be able to handle the power of these three numbers right back to back, the 4 and the 5 and the 0. I mean, do you really need that much power all the time? And I know that's kind of calling the kettle black because a lot of the time I'm riding a 300 two-stroke as of late.
Oh yeah, that was a good one.
I think we'd be better off, a lot of us, with smaller displacement dirt bikes. And the 454 stroke is just a beast of a machine. It is made for doing a specific purpose, and that is to race motocross and win motocross and supercross. But most of us on this channel, we're not doing that exact type of riding. And even if we were, are you Ryan Dungey? Are you Ken Roxon? Are you Ryan Villapoto? I'm not sure that we need that. I mean, Cooper Webb, if any of you pay attention to Supercross, Cooper Webb rides a 250 and he's faster than anyone within the sound of my voice. And he's on a 250. In fact, all the guys that are riding 250s are way faster than you and I. And they're doing it on that measly little 254 stroke. And I sit there and I think, I would do much better. I'd be much better off if I had to ride supercross or motocross starting out with a 250 and probably would never ever actually need a 450. There is so much that happens when you twist the throttle on this bike. And there's so much power that is put to the ground that sometimes you spend a lot of energy and effort just trying to control the inputs that you're giving into that throttle tube. Here's the rub though, guys. Ego comes into this a lot. I mean, how many of us are willing to admit that we should be riding a smaller dirt bike? Not many of us. You guys have heard the term walk before you run, right? That's kind of what we do when we're growing up. We learn to walk first. First we learn to stand up, then we learn to walk, then we learn to run. Well, on our dirt bikes, a lot of times we just start right out with running. I know I did. When I started 5 or 6 years ago, I started on a bike just like this one. It was a YZ450F. It was way too much bike for me. And once I switched down to a different model, a different style of dirt bike, I actually enjoyed myself a lot better. I wasn't wrestling the bear so much, you know, all the time when I'm out there on the trail. And for you guys that are out there on the track, I know I don't have a ton of track riders that watch the channel, but let's just think this through for a minute. Everybody who's racing competitive supercross and competitive motocross, they all start with a lower CC bike and they prove themselves on that bike. They learn all the skills, they learn all the body position, they learn everything they need to know to be a phenomenal rider on that 250 machine. We're talking about 254 strokes now. It used to be 125 two-strokes back in the day, but today it's the 254 strokes. And I think that the 254 strokes are a fantastic place for the adult rider, at least the full-bodied rider, to start and to learn and to make sure that you can squeeze every ounce of energy out of that platform before you move up to a bigger platform, a bigger motor. I mean, the platforms are the same, but the motors are going to be different. The power plants are going to be a lot different. And that changes the characteristics of the bike and what the bike wants to do and how it wants to handle. And I look at some of these guys out there on their 250s and I'm just like, these people are phenomenal, amazing riders, better than I will ever be, and they're barely maxing out the potential of that dirt bike. What makes me think that I can do any better than them? I know I can't do as good as them, yet I've got this stinking 450 sitting in my garage, and it's because I've been caught up in the trap that everyone else has been caught up in, which is I need horsepower and I need a big motor and I need to have, you know, the most power available to me as soon as I turn the throttle. And I think that that is a misnomer. And I think a lot of us are doing ourselves a disservice by having these bigger bikes. I certainly feel it when I'm riding this thing. When I had my 350, I had a KTM 350 four-stroke before this one. That bike I was a lot more comfortable on. I think we've all been duped just a little bit when it comes to the displacement needs on our dirt bikes. I see a lot of four-stroke bikes when I'm out there riding the single track trails and when I'm out there in the desert and everywhere in between. And that's fine, the four-strokes are great. Here's the problem though. Most of the bikes that I see are 450s, and I think that's because we've all been tricked into this horsepower and this displacement misnomer that you have to have a ton of displacement. You have to have the 450 to be able to have enough power to go the places you want to go and to not get whooped by your friends along the way. I never really see 250 four-strokes unless it's a teenager riding it. And I think that more of us adults, full-grown men, and seasoned riders would actually be doing better if we were riding 250s. I'm willing to admit I don't need the power of a 450. I can get by, I should be able to get by. I'd be better off getting by with the power on a 250. And if I have to kind of split hairs and say, well, maybe what should I really have? Let's go for the 350s. I know that KTM makes a 350, Husky makes a 350, and that's probably the sweet spot there because it's not such a massive beast that the 450 is, but it's got more grunt than the 250, and so that's kind of the sweet spot. And I think that's where I'm at personally, is I think that 350 is really tough to beat. Takes some of the edge off of these 450s. It doesn't have quite all of that, but it's got a little bit more oomph than the 250s that a lot of us feel like we're above and we need more power than that. So maybe the 350 is what you ought to be looking for. Do you really need all that power all the time? Are you really okay with having to wrestle this monster? Because sometimes these bikes are a monster, and I'm not saying that the 300 two-stroke or some of these other bikes aren't monsters, but the 450 four-strokes are monsters. They are beasts. Those suckers have so much power and they just want to go, and sometimes they'll fight you doing what it will fight you because it knows what it wants to do, and it's got so much rotating mass and so much power down there in the motor that it is just like riding a wild bull. What if you spent some time on a lower CC dirt bike and got your fundamentals down better? I see guys at the beginning of, off-road races and desert races. I look at the lineups of those bikes there, and I see there's a lot of 450s, and that's because they are amazing. They have amazing power plants and they've got a ton of power. And some of those guys say, hey, if I didn't have this 450, I wouldn't be able to win. Well, I would invite those people to look at the 2014 season when Caleb Russell had the GNCC series completely wrapped up. I know I've talked about this before, and he goes out and he races the last two races of that season on a 152 stroke. Now the 152 stroke is completely inferior in power to the 454 stroke. But what happened? He actually was able to beat all those guys on his 152 stroke. And that's because he's a phenomenal rider. He's able to wring every bit of power out of that little 150, and he was able to take the guys on their 450s, on these behemoths, and some of them are riding 350s as well. But the point is, he was able to squeeze every bit of power out of that bike and get everything out of it. Most of us are never going to ever be anywhere near that level where we're squeezing every bit of potential out of these bikes. And it comes back to that. Wouldn't we be doing better if we had a bike where we could actually squeeze more, let's say, 75% of the potential out of that frame, out of that model, rather than on the 450 only being able to scratch the surface of it? Think about that for a second. If you are a rider that is able to say, squeeze maybe 65 or 70% of the potential out of that 250, you're only going to be able to squeeze maybe 35 or 40% of the potential out of the 450. So why not stay with that 250 and learn to squeeze more of the power and more of the potential out of that 250, because you'll be a better overall rider. Whether you're riding motocross, supercross, off-road, desert, what I'm saying is if you learn to squeeze more power out of your bike with a smaller motor, you're going to be going just as fast as those other guys, and you're going to be more fundamentally sound. And then If you get to the point where you honestly are maxing out the potential of that 250 and you think that you need to upgrade to a 450, you are going to work the guys who didn't go that route. We first learn how to walk, then we learn how to run, right? We first learn how to talk, then we learn how to sing. It's the same concept here. What I'm saying is so many of us just jump straight to these 450s. I did it. A lot of you guys have done it, but we'd probably be better off if we had, milk before the meat, so to speak. And if we learn how to be better riders, and whether we're doing track stuff, whether we're doing off-road stuff, let's start with a smaller displacement and let's get really good at that. And then maybe move up to our big bikes and our big motors. These 450s are phenomenal at what they do. That's not the question. The question is, are you too proud to admit that it's possibly more power and more bike than you realistically can handle? I'm not too proud to admit it. It is more bike than I need. Are you too proud to admit that?